Myrle, thanks for joining us today. It's been, it seems stupid to say it's an anniversary because an anniversary sort of implies that there's some happy element to it, but it's been 10 years ago, just in a couple days, that flood hit. I want you to, take us back long before the idea of flooding was a thing. Being a child at Lake St. Martin, the role that the land and the water played in your life growing up.
Yes, thank you for having me. When the flood happened in May 8th, 2011, we happened to be there at the time. I was out in the community doing research with the team. And when we went to the local health center, and there was a bus there at the time, waiting to evacuate the members of the community. And the community members were standing around with just an overnight bag. And it was a cloudy day. And I remember that day very well because I thought that the community would only be gone for a few days, like the government said. And that they were waiting around for the bus with just an overnight bag. And that memories, I was still very much etched in my mind. But going out throughout the years, I remember seeing my community, the way water changed the community, because we grew up in a community that was very sustainable. We had our own livelihoods. The people looked after themselves, and they had farms, they had cattle, they were fishing every year. They were sustaining themselves. They made their own living. And throughout the years, when the first water control structure was built in 1960, 1961, from that point on, the yearly flooding changed the way the people lived. It destroyed a way of life. From being able to look after themselves, self-sustainable, and looking after themselves with the various livelihoods. They changed their way, and they started to depend on the government for assistance.
You know, what
and
was...
this?
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. And this has a big impact to the community because they lost their traditional way of life. They lost their ability to look after themselves. They used to hunt, they used to trap, they used to fish, they used to pick berries, and they used to use the water a lot. There's a lot of cultural and spiritual uses of the water. And now with the flooding that happened, they can't do these activities anymore.
What was the purpose of the, so I mean, not everybody, we're from, this region, so we have a little bit more knowledge of the situation, of course, than our broader national audience, people watching from across the rest of Canada. Explain what changed the water there? Like, what was the province doing? What was the point? Was it hydro dams? Was it for farming, irrigation or something? What was happening at the time that first started to change the flow of the water through the area?
The first time when the water control structure was built at the Diversion Dam, when this was constructed to save the Lake Manitoba farms, agriculture areas, the recreational users, so that the water doesn't flood communities around where there were farms. So they built that Diversion Dam to divert the water from Lake Manitoba to go into Lake St. Martin. And in 1971, they built the portage diversion to save the city of Winnipeg from flooding. And the water coming in from
we're looking right now as you're talking. We're seeing some of the pictures here of what happened when they did that to save Winnipeg. Cutting that hoop and holler to flood the Interlake region to spare Winnipeg. We're seeing some of the effect of that. And this isn't even the worst. What we're seeing right now, I mean, some of the houses were up mid points of the walls, like the main floor of houses had been underwater. And we're seeing what we're watching right now is just kind of a map of how it went from Portage la Prairie. They let this big burst of water go so it would go north instead of through east to the to Winnipeg, and would have flooded Winnipeg. So, sorry, I just wanted to explain that to our viewers who are watching that, Myrle. So, carry on.
Yeah.
See, yeah, we're now seeing some of the insides of these houses, like just after the water subsided, just the amount of... These houses were ruined. Entire communities needed to be rebuilt from the ground up.
Yeah, so in 2011 was the super flood of the century. So the government of Manitoba at the time declared an emergency where the Emergency Measures Act was implemented. And what this meant was the government had authority to do whatever it wanted regarding the water. So the government of the day forced displaced Lake St. Martin, and Lake St. Martin was a community that was 100% forced displaced. Mm-hmm. And the entire community was forced to move in May 2011. And they started to build a new community in 2017. Mm-hmm. And to this day, about 1/3 of the community is still displaced, that they don't have a home to move back to. Mm-hmm. And this was against the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People.
Right.
Where you're not allowed to force displace an entire community. You have to consult with the community. And the community was never consulted when they were displaced. And the community was never discussed when the new community was built. So the government made a unilateral decision regarding where the new community would be located.
I want to talk to you a bit about a project that you did, kind of delving into the impact that this man-made flood had on community, people from your community and communities surrounding there. And we're going to share a clip of one of the testimonials from the elders that you spoke with. Here's Mary.
How do we rebuild? You know, our medicines, our fish, our waters, our habitats, you know, for fish getting destroyed. What's the future for our kids, grandkids, great-grandkids for me? And I want to speak up against this stuff. You know, that's where it's at. The homes, relationships. We're so divided in our little reserve, divided.
You know, that's hard to watch. I'm sure it was hard for you to go out and gather those stories too. Was there a common thread that you were hearing when you were talking to elders about the devastation that this caused?
Yes, there was a common thread. A lot of the elders that I talked to cried. When the elders start crying when they talk about the land, that means that something is wrong with the land. And that resonated with the elders that I talked to. All of them cried when they started when they talked about the land being displaced, and talking about the loneliness that they faced when they wanted to go home, but they couldn't go home.
You know, and they were, I mean, it's one thing to be away from home and you've lost all of your worldly possessions. Everything's gone. You're away from home. But they were forced to stay for a prolonged period of time, some of them years, in hotels. Yeah. Isn't that right? Yeah. You know, can you talk a little bit about, you know, not everybody made it through that?
Yeah. A lot of members from the communities, Lake St. Martin, Dolphin River, and Saskatchewan, a lot of the community members died when they were displaced. And this is very disheartening when we lost people, due to loneliness. being evacuated from their land and not being able to go back. There's a lot of people from Lake St. Martin that died when they got buried. They got buried in watery graves.
Yeah.
The people tell stories when people were buried that when they dug holes in the ground, that the water just came up before the coffins were put in the ground. And the people talk about this, that to see this regarding their loved ones being buried in watery graves, there's something to them. That it's not right. No one, if they're not First Nation and the rest of Canada to do this, no one would allow this. But that's what they did with the First Nations that died during the time.
Yeah. I know I was, right after the flood, when the waters had subsided, I was in three of the communities not long after that. And just seeing, the cemeteries, people who had been buried there for decades upon decades, those cemeteries just, they were spitting out graves. Like, it was tough. I can't imagine if that was, one of my loved ones. And like you said, this isn't the reality that non-Indigenous people will face in this country. It doesn't happen, right? I want to just go and hear from another elder, and then I'll come back and let you say, your response to that. I want to hear from another elder from your project. This is Derek.
We had many farms in our communities. They used to grow big massive gardens of potatoes and you name it, all the vegetables within our communities. There was medicines that have been lost due to the flood as well, that some of our people have get from the land, and they're not there no more. Where we used to have pristine alfalfa growing, it's now all bulrushes, and it's pretty hard to make a living now with in regards to agriculture. I try and pass that on to my children to live off the land. I'm also a commercial fisherman as well, and the destruction of the high waters have changed the currents so much that the migration of fish have changed. We have to go out further onto the lake, and the lake freezes a lot later now because of the high currents. The ice cannot freeze.
Myrle, land and water systems are in your blood. Like you talked about that being just such ingrained in you from being a little one. And then you go and you have your PhD in this too, right? Like it's stitched into the fabric of who you are. So, and it's close to home. This is your home where this happened too. Lake St. Martin's one of the communities affected. So I have to ask you, I think nobody more than you would have an answer to have a better answer to this. What is to be learned from this, from a water management perspective? What can we learn, and what can we do better?
One thing we learned, the lesson learned. There's another outlet channel that's being proposed that's going to be going from Lake Manitoba into Lake Martin into Lake Winnipeg. And the government of Manitoba, the province of Manitoba, is currently proposing this outlet channel. It's in the final stages. And I would like to encourage the people to speak out against this outlet channel, because if it goes through, it will do so much damage to the waters, to the lands, to the livelihoods of the people. Water is life, and people, we need to realize that we need to voice our concerns about this outlet channel that's being proposed. We have to put a stop to it.
Myrle, thank you so much for joining us, and like I said, on this kind of, seems stupid to call it an anniversary, but 10 years later, and we'll be in touch. Of course, this isn't done yet. There's many more chapters probably in this ridiculousness.